Hello and welcome to today's PSU Transportation Seminar. My name is Jason Anderson and I will be introducing and moderating today's seminar. Our PSU, I'm in charge of slides today. Our PSU Transportation Seminars have been a tradition since the year 2000. These seminars are once again being held live on Portland State University's urban campus, located on the ancestral homelands of the Multnomah, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Tumwater, and Watlala bands of the Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, and many other indigenous nations of the Columbia River. It is important to acknowledge that we are here because of the sacrifices forced on the indigenous ancestors of this place, remember these communities, and to honor their legacy, lives, and descendants. Today, we are pleased to have Fiona Lyon and Miles Anderson presenting on TriMet and TOD, opportunities for growth. Miles is a project coordinator at TriMet with Regional Transit Agency, or the Regional Transit Agency for the Portland metro area. He supports planning work on the transit-oriented development, the TOD, team, and implements projects for the space planning program. His background is in station area planning, and his professional interests include reducing vehicle miles traveled, promoting efficient land use, and advancing equity outcomes through the built environment. Fiona is a design manager with TriMet, also the Regional Transit Agency for the Portland metro area. Her background in public service and urban design help her plan, design, and manage transit-oriented development, or TOD, opportunities for the agency to pursue through strategic public and private community partnerships. TOD supports the region's long-term vision for growth by realizing equitable transit supportive density, enhancing human-centered placemaking opportunities, and supporting transit ridership through improved land use and multimodal access. Fiona is a registered landscape architect in Oregon and in California. Here is a preview of our upcoming seminars. If you would like to register. As an overview of today's seminar, you can expect our speaker to speak for about 40 minutes, followed by a Q&A session. We will be receiving questions through the Q&A feature on your control panel, and we'll ask them at the end of the presentation. If we run out of time for all of your questions, we will give our speaker the opportunity to email written responses for any questions left unanswered. We have enabled closed captioning, but you must click on the CC feature on your control panel to view them. We will be recording today's webinar. It will be available on our website later today, along with the presentation slides. If you are tracking professional development hours, this webinar is eligible for 1 hour of continuing education credit. With that, I will hand it over to Fiona and Miles for today's Friday Transportation Seminar. You don't want that, yeah.
Awesome. Thank you for the intro, and thank you all for joining today. I think we might have our colleague Guy Ben a little bit later. He's in the training right now. He's our program manager for the Transit Development Program. And we will, let me know if you have any trouble hearing me, mask on. And I think we're just going to go through some slides, kind of give an overview of our program, introduce and share this regional plan that we've been working on, and leave some time for some questions. So yeah, just before we jump in, I always like to just define TOD in case there's anyone in the room who's never heard that acronym. Transit-oriented development, really just trying to improve the land use around transit, trying to get good community serving uses, really kind of strong along the backbone of our transit network. And for anyone who doesn't know TriMet, I'm sure there's a lot of folks in here that already live in Portland, but we are the transit agency for the region. We do cover about 26 cities and 3 counties. Got a pretty large reach, a lot of different communities and areas that we're looking under. So yeah, really today we're trying to kind of socialize and promote what we're calling our regional TOD plan. It is, I did bring a couple copies that I wanted to circulate just as we're talking. If you want to kind of thumb through it. It's available online electronically. And it's really intended to be just kind of a living document that our agency will keep iterating on, permutating, kind of keeping alive in the years to come. And it's really just kind of a guidance tool for what we as an agency are trying to do. So really just kind of starting with an overview of like how we got here today. There's kind of been a long-standing interest in the region, not just TriMet, but Metro and many community members, many developers, on this concept of TOD and really how we promote it more and how we actually get more implementation throughout the region. So way back in 2020, like kind of COVID days, early COVID days, we approved what was called our TOD guidelines. And it was literally just this like 3-page outline that said, here's kind of the goals of TOD for TriMet. Pretty simple, pretty high level. And that alone was kind of socialized throughout the community with a lot of different developers, a lot of nonprofit groups, a lot of community members, just to understand, like, are we on the right track? Is this something, TriMet has a lot of interest in this, making sure that everyone else also wants to support that. We are a public agency, so we're always kind of at the guidance of the community to help steer us and what we put our effort and resources towards. So in 2020, that was adopted by our board. It was really high level. But we kept hearing like, we want to hear more, like, what else are you doing? And, how can we kind of learn more than just this 3-page overview? What are your projects that are coming up? What are your long-term goals? How are you going to be accountable to your goals? We want more transparency. And we heard that kind of from everybody, developers, the community, our board members. Every time we go and give an update, we try to go quarterly. They're always, kind of cheerleading TOD. They want to see more. So really this document and effort was to help guide us towards how we can kind of enhance our production of TOD as an agency. So in spring 2021, we applied for a grant with the state for TGM grant, Transit Growth Management. They're awesome. They gave us $240,000 that we could then use to kind of guide this effort with some consultant expertise and really help develop the plan. In 2022, just last summer, we really kind of came up with a draft and said, all right, how are we doing? Put it out there for comments. Throughout this whole process, we've had a stakeholder work group or advisory group, really crafted with a lot of different perspectives so that we could make sure that the plan is responding to a lot of different parties. So took that feedback, tried to keep refining this plan, really working towards like a tangible product that you can hold, that you can read through, that really is catered towards a variety of different audiences. And then just this last spring, we kind of said, all right, let's pause, let's print this thing, let's publish it. We give a big report out to our board. TriMet is guided by 6 or 7 board members. And we got a really good, strong reception, like, yes, you're on the right path. Let's keep doing this. Let's keep investing. But as I mentioned, it's meant to be a living document. I think, like, we don't ever print a plan and then put it on a shelf. Like, this is really meant to be kind of a toolkit guidance that can help us, help others, like really kind of clarify expectations. And as I mentioned, really be kind of a transparency tool for how the agency is operating. So we've just been, I'd say since the spring, like trying to keep projects that we have in the queue going, really chasing more grant opportunities to do some higher level planning efforts, and really just kind of making sure that we're able to share this document with folks who are interested so that we can really kind of enhance collaborations and partnerships where those opportunities exist. So kind of stepping back, why did we do this? I think I covered a lot of the points, just really kind of expanding on those TOD guidelines, giving transparency, really trying to outline our engagement guidelines. And what we mean by that is TriMet itself is not a developer. We are a transit agency primarily. We do own like a real estate portfolio. Our entire rail corridor is under TriMet ownership. We also have a lot of miscellaneous tax parcels that either serve as like an operational yard, a park and ride, a transit center, the solar array panels kind of up near PSU. Those are all, on TriMet land. And so really this is an exercise of how do we look at TriMet land a little differently? And I think previous uses are now maybe up for question about how can we really enhance them to serve the community better. And so anyways, TriMet is not a developer, so we need to partner with folks who are, either whether it's a community group, whether it's a nonprofit, whether it's a for-profit, whether it's a partner agency, and there's a lot of different avenues that we're trying to kind of exercise that kind of capital or the kind of currency, I guess I would say, that we have, which is land and transit. And really trying to make sure we're on the right path. And then at the very end, we're going to talk about this a little bit more. It's just kind of our implementation framework. Like, I think we've been in this, you know, I'm a landscape architect, but we work with, we're trying to do development, trying to like enhance the utilization of our land. And so it's been really eye-opening and educational for us to just learn about how development works. It's really hard. I don't know if anyone here has ever tried to develop something or even been on kind of a project that's doing development. You know, there's a lot of code, there's a lot of different financial pieces, there's a lot of requirement, the community has a lot of input, and so trying to tie it all together. We tried to just outline kind of, here's what we know, we recognize it's hard, here's some opportunities, here's some challenges, like how can TriMet itself be a part of that conversation and help assist it. We're not naive that it is a really hard process. But yeah, generally providing clarity, continuity, and just kind of a structure for our group. So we're 2 people in our program. Guy I mentioned might show up. We're very small, we have limited resources, and so we're just constantly trying to make sure that we're kind of getting the best value out of our staff time. And so the planned contents, just kind of talking about the structure of this document. We put a lot of thought into how it's set up into different chapters and kind of the who, what, why, where, when. We, as I mentioned, have a lot of different audiences that are interested in this topic. And so we wanted to just make sure that like when somebody gets a hold of this, if I'm a community member that wants to figure out how I can get my neighborhood organization to have a temporary, you know, summer lease or something on TriMet property, this is a relevant tool for me to understand versus someone who wants to build a new library or build some housing, like that we have enough clarity on how TriMet operates, like all the checkpoints that we need to do internally. So really trying to think about like a solid structure for how we're walking through the plan. And then let's see, I'm going to do this one and then I'm going to hand it over to Miles. So that first chapter is really just kind of the why. I mean, I think you're all, I would assume, experts in transportation. You know, you've got kind of the high level picture of why TOD is good, what we're trying to steer towards. And I think for TriMet, this TOD itself is a really strong, powerful tool for delivering on our climate action goals and our equity goals. And so I think our general manager recognizes that. It's like, you know, more TOD, because he sees that it's people getting out of their car, it's people being able to have affordable housing near transit. Like there's so many different aspects of it that are delivered under the umbrella of TOD. And so really this is just kind of the pillars of our program, our general goals. I'm gonna hand it to Miles. You want to talk about what happens in there?
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Fiona. So a couple of interesting pieces as we get into chapter 2, which kind of lays out the region's transit history and also the readiness that TriMet has to use some of these tools to leverage them towards TOD. But I think one thing that's important to echo that Fiona was speaking about is TriMet's unique role in this space, right? So we're not a developer. We have assets and we have transit, and we want to leverage those into something that really benefits the region. But of course, we're operating under, you know, state, regional, and also local jurisdictions, transportation and land use plans. So in a lot of cases, when we're looking at challenges and opportunities for a site, we need to recognize that we don't have land use control. So in some jurisdictions, it's not too bad, and we have the flexibility to really put forward the density that we want to see. But in some cases, we're running up against codes that may not be the most conducive to developing density around transit. And we're not an agency that we obviously have weight, but we don't have the actual power to translate that into code changes. But then of course, we're working in compliance with like RTP, local master plans, things like that. And you can kind of see how that is the top of what governs us. Then we like to slot in this plan kind of in the TriMet space after that. So this plan really gives our program charter and lays out with a transparency how we're moving forward and advancing projects in the region. Then you can kind of see the next two levels of focus with regards to our program is that we might do sub-regional stationary planning work. We actually just secured our second grant fund from the FTA to do stationary planning. We're just wrapping up our Better Red stationary planning that's linked to the Better Red extension to the airport and out to Hillsborough. So that would, fit under the regional TOD plan and help us really get a sense of our site context and progress that on the continuum from planning to development. And then, of course, that may lead to individual site studies or master plans. For example, we did a couple at, we did one at Willow Creek out on the west side, and we are also working on an east side park and ride planning grant that we just submitted the RFP out for at 122nd and 181st. So hopefully that gives a sense of kind of these different levels that we're interacting with the space and how we're working to leverage our assets into density around our transit stops. Thank you. Okay, so this is really where a lot of the nuts and bolts of the plan come out. So this is chapter 3, looking at our prioritization framework. And essentially we started, as Fiona mentioned, with our real property inventory. So that's everything that TriMet owns. It's little like fingernail parcels from purchasing right away for development. And it's like our new Powell bus garage. It's everything that we and as you can imagine, some of those are great for TOD. It could be a surface park and ride that's just asphalt, or it could be, like 10 feet by 16 feet on, Barber. So what we really wanted to do that Fiona was alluding to is get a sense of, okay, what's truly in play for TriMet to develop. Let's not mix terms. Let's really look at what is the inventory for development. And then in step 2, we're going with the database screening. So I think we have 63 metrics in the plan that really help us understand, what's the site connectivity, what's the access, what are the assets around that space, and how can that help us percolate sites that might be the most readily for development. And then we also have qualitative analysis. We want to involve community perspectives, operational perspectives, things that we need to be aware of as an agency. And that really gives us the opportunity to kind of do a gut check, an internal check with all of our stakeholders, with the board. As Fiona mentioned, this chapter was definitely where the bulk of the stakeholder advisory group was able to fold in comments and make sure that we were incorporating the right things into this very zeros and ones kind of analysis. So after we've done that, we basically take it to our internal stakeholders and we understand, is this a park and ride that we're doing bus trainings on? Is this a space that we're going to expand, possibly that we need extra capacity for? Are these truly at play, or do we need to withhold these for strategic reasons? Of course, everything we do is guided by TriMet's internal equity lens. And so understanding the context of our sites and how they fold into the community has actually really informed the outputs and thinking about whether a site is a primed TOD development or a catalytic TOD development. We're of course really conscious about gentrification impacts in the community, and we want to do what we can to increase access to transit while still mitigating the disproportionate impacts on our low income, our BIPOC folks that are working in the service district. And then of course, I think this piece is actually really interesting. We have an opportunity index. So what we're seeing through plan development is that, as it could be expected, a lot of our downtown are closer into the core sites. We're showing up red hot for all of our analysis factors because they're well connected, they have great access to everything. But that's not really how we want to approach the program. We want to be cognizant of the jurisdictions that we're working with. And we want to make sure that we're providing opportunities for folks, especially as we develop housing, that's moved throughout the regions, that we're not just focusing in one place. And then ultimately that comes out in the prioritization of our sites. We have a high, medium, and low output that help us understand kind of the spectrum of sites. And that ultimately is what will guide the program, folding in some of the planning work that we're doing that might help bring a site to the top if we've done some recent studies. But otherwise, really, this is the process by which we can look at all of our tax lots and say, hey, these would have the highest community impact if we were to pursue partnership to redevelop these. And I'll pass it over to Fiona to kind of talk about how those proposals or that part of the solicitation piece works.
So yeah, chapter 4, if you have the book and I'll flip to that. Really, I'd say, actually on the top, it says solicitation process. We have kind of 2 avenues for how we can communicate things. One is that we can go to the world and say, hey, we have this opportunity, we've thought about it, we've done, you know, we've looked at all the city plans, we've talked to the community, we generally know like, these are the things that we want to do here. And we advertise the opportunity and see what we get back from developers to say like, this is how we're gonna do that. And vice versa, we also have this other extensive portfolio that Miles mentioned that, you know, is part of these inputs that we just walked through on the framework that we might not be thinking about. Like we don't have a primed opportunity to communicate to the world, but somebody might have some amazing idea for what they want to do that is, you know, it aligns with our goals, it aligns with our agency, aligns with the community. So it's like things that we might not even be thinking about, but somebody else has the resources, the bandwidth to come to us and say, I have this really awesome idea, do you want to do that? So anyways, it's kind of like we put out opportunities and we also are receiving things. So I just want to make sure everyone understands, because it's not just like a one-way street. Like we have this big queue of things that we're going to do and we're just marching through it. Like we want to be nimble, we want to react to things. We know that the market, the economic market is constantly changing. I'll talk about in a minute, you know, a library that we're situating right at our transit. Like that was an opportunity that if we had made this plan 10 years ago, like it wouldn't be on here, but there was a big bond measure with the county. Like they had a queue of their needs and their facilities they needed to build. So it's trying to come to these collaborations where it's like, oh my God, we can both do the same thing and meet all of our goals if we just like kind of talk to each other early and make sure that we're kind of implementing things at transit to really help build that bigger vision of our region. So anyway, so it was kind of an aside from just the 2 general processes. But really, it's just trying to understand and communicate like, hey, this is what to expect if you work with TriMet. There are, you know, I'm not gonna lie, there's more steps than if you didn't work with TriMet, but there's also a lot of value that we see that we can bring for partnering with somebody. And so really, this is just kind of an outline of like, here's what we have to do internally with our staff, with our board, making sure that, you know, we have pretty high standards for community engagement. I think when we go to conferences and talk to some other peers, like, they're like, oh, we did 3 community meetings. And then we are like moving forward. We're like, what? Wow, we do like dozens and dozens and dozens for a single project. So like I think like we want to maintain a high bar. We don't want to be unrealistic or like keep things. I think we do want to keep the implementation kind of energy moving. And so it's trying to find that balance of like really trying to make these projects as rich as they possibly can. So really it's just kind of an overview. And sometimes like we'll go through this process like, oh, we think we have a site that the framework said was really good. Okay, we're gonna like kind of think on it some more. Let's get it teed up. We talked to the city. They've got some kind of mojo coming around it. And then we realized like, oh, you know, the planning, the zoning is like 50 years old. It's never been updated. Like, let's hit pause. Let's see, you know, rather than getting like a 1-story industrial development, like let's work together. Let's see how we can really enhance that zoning to be a mixed use community. So sometimes it's like this kind of feedback loop of, well, it's not quite ready. Miles mentioned these terms catalytic and primed. And really just kind of what we mean by that is like a primed site was this building we're in, you know, a lot in the middle of the city that had so much potential. And there's just this incredible pedestrian grid, there's transit, there's all these other uses, there's the university, there's jobs, there's housing. Like this was kind of the missing tooth, but like something that had, like it's kind of the final piece to make things click. Something that's catalytic, I think we think a little bit more of like, we have a site, but it's in an island. There's nothing around it. There's no grocery stores. There's no sidewalks. Like it's just, it needs a lot more input, but it also has the power to kind of like change the entire neighborhood around it. Like if we put in resources, and we kind of have this like concept of 1 + 1 = 3. Like if we put in $1 and then somebody else is putting in $1, and like, you know, you can just kind of really grow that momentum of development and kind of community input and investments when you are the first person to really push it out there. So anyways, all this is just really like what to expect if you work with TriMet. I think we generally have really good values. Like I mentioned, we have a really supportive board. And so we're just trying to constantly understand how to communicate opportunities and find those kind of synergistic partnerships. Chapter 5, so we're getting towards the end. This is really just kind of like, how do we, once we go through that process, we've worked with somebody, I'm going to say Miles is the partner that we're going to go into develop a site with. Like we've come to some sort of arrangement on like generally what our timeline is, what our goals are, how much you're going to interact with our support, with the community, like what you're able to deliver for the project that connects into a lot of the like transit assets. And sometimes it's TriMet saying like, we've got to do all these things already. Like, you know, we're basically building your frontage improvements. Like how can we kind of work together? It's really just kind of implementation. I mentioned there's so many challenges to development. I think the market's constantly shifting. And we really want to be helpful and kind of the brainchildren of like, you know, we're talking to all these other transit agencies across the country. We talk to developers a lot. We talk to consultants a lot. Like we're trying to just constantly gauge the landscape of like what's happening, where those opportunities exist, what funding might be available that the developer might not know about that we as a public agency could tap into and help their project, like finance a new building. So just trying to outline kind of all those different things that we can kind of, again, it's the value add that TriMet can do for the project. And so, yeah, I think just, you know, we have a couple case studies in our TOD plan, just kind of outlining, like, I think we kind of skipped over this, but like, the thing that TriMet is really trying to get aside, you know, in addition to community benefits and community investments, is like ridership. That's like a very clear metric that we can measure to say this is very successful. So Metro helps us. They have all these tools and spreadsheets to say like, if you have X amount of units of housing at this affordability, like generally you can expect 25,000 riders from these 75 units per year. So we're trying to kind of constantly quantify, you know, how can we maximize that ridership increase with the assets that we have. So this is just kind of an overview of some of the projects that we've built in recent years. A lot of them are housing. I think, you know, we hear housing crunch every single day. It's a huge issue, not just here, West Coast, the entire, you know, United States. And so that is a huge aspiration of ours. I will say, one of the things that has kind of separated our program from other transit agencies' TOD program is that we're really hot on mixed use. I think like this morning I was thinking about how to kind of phrase this, but it just seems like if you have all housing along a transit corridor, you know, unless I'm going to my friend's house in that light rail station 4 stops on the way, like there's not really a general community gain from that. Like I think you benefit more when I'm going to my job that's also accessed by transit. When somebody's dropping their kid off at childcare, when, you know, you're going to PSU with Max, like I think what the more rich and the wider variety of amenities there are that are co-located, that's where that mixed use benefits like really helps kind of the entire ecosystem of our transit opportunities. So a lot of these you'll see like there's ground floor development. I think we try not to just get kind of only stuck in housing. That is really important, but I think we really want to make sure there's other value adds that we're able to capture. This library I mentioned, we're really excited about this one. Again, this was a bond measure back in 2020 that the county put out to do a lot of rehabs for community libraries, but also build this brand new, like 100,000 square foot facility to serve, you know, there was a huge deficit of libraries in East County. And so this is like a big new flagship community facility that, you think about like what's inside the library, it's just a huge variety of community programs, services, access to education, childcare, you name it. And so things like that, that is like the signature, we're so excited to be able to locate that on a transit line. There's literally the Max station, like 10 feet out the front door, like that is just a dream come true for us. Hollywood project, it's been it's a challenging site. We went through all these different kind of federal boundary issues with the lot lines. Financing for affordable housing is really hard. It's super competitive. There's just the landscape again is constantly changing. But this project is breaking ground right now as we speak. It's 224 units of housing. It's right across from Trader Joe's. It's in just an incredibly amenitized neighborhood. So being able to provide that many families with, good school, good transit's right behind it. Unfortunately, the Target right next to it just announced that they're closing, which is a little bit heartbreaking. But anyway, like in general, the neighborhood has a lot of amazing amenities. So that's one of those like, oh man, the neighborhood is primed. We have this perfect site that has just been this big oversized bus loop for the last 40 years that can really be envisioned so much more high quality. So I'm gonna kind of wrap us up and we can move to questions. I think really we're excited about our program, the fact that we exist. We are excited that the community is really interested in TOD, that our board is interested in TOD. And I think we really just want to kind of keep increasing our capacity to do this type of work. I think our community will benefit, across the entire region. We have a million people to thank for all of this work. And, I mentioned the kind of funding piece, that is huge, but also just there's been so many voices that have helped shape what we're doing. Like we don't work in a vacuum. I think we very much operate on feedback and making sure that we're on the right path, because we really we're not doing this for us, we're doing this for the community. And yeah, so I think I do see Guy Ben, our program manager, is here. And so maybe this is a good point to stop and we can kind of open it up to questions. And if you see something in the actual plan that you want to kind of elaborate on or ask questions about, we can certainly dig into that. Yeah.
Great presentation, very interesting stuff. I go by the Hollywood site all the time, so it's super exciting to see development and affordable housing over there. So my question is, you mentioned some of the differences between you and TOD programs across the country, and I was wondering if there are any programs that you look to in making this plan and that you want to emulate the outcomes.
Yeah, you want to talk about our partners up north?
Yeah, so good afternoon or good afternoon, everybody. Guy Ben, I'm the program manager. So I worked with Fiona a while. Sorry, I had a conflict. In terms of programs, we do look nationwide and we actually look internationally as well. But there is a sort of Sound Transit have a very robust TOD program, and some of the environment considerations that that exist across the Pacific Northwest are also applicable to the Portland metro area. We sort of take the approach that plagiarism is the finest form of flattery. And I shouldn't perhaps say that amongst most of students, but we're looking at the best ideas, and it would be foolish if we're not learning from other programs on what's worked well and what hasn't. And that's the purpose of the plan itself, as Fiona Miles have explained. It's a dynamic document that we want to evolve, and we're constantly looking for feedback because circumstances are changing. To be applicable to current conditions, plans need to evolve with that.
I would maybe just elaborate on it too. I'm going to point out, we have an audience member, Udit, who was an intern this summer, and I think his contribution to our program was really awesome, because I think one of the things that most TOD programs across the country struggle with is that, again, development takes a really long time. It can take like 10 years to purchase a property, get the entitlements, go through the design process, find a contractor, build it. It's a long haul. And so a lot of people are trying to figure out, like, what do we do in the interim? Like, it doesn't have to just sit there fallow as a field or as a park and ride that's got nothing in it. And so UDIT's helped us really brainstorm, what are those other agencies doing? How do we connect with them? A lot of people are using kind of more temporary activation, art programs, like more kind of soccer fields and just like really simple, easy, cheap things that can be implemented that kind of help fill the void in that like long period of time. So anyway, I just wanted to kind of call attention to UDIT's amazing work for this. Yeah, we do have some really good kind of cross collaboration between different transit agencies that have TOD programs, which is great.
All right, so just a quick reminder before we do additional questions that for those viewing on the webinar, you're encouraged to submit your questions using the Q&A feature in the control panel at the bottom of your Zoom window. And so with that, we'll continue with questions.
Thanks. We do have an online question. We have a couple, but we'll start with the first one. Somebody's wondering, how are you measuring the impact of the ROI of the TOD initiatives? So like walkability, safety, housing affordability, things like that.
Gosh, that's a great question. I mean, we're trying to constantly quantify metrics. I think like units of housing is a good one. Affordability levels is a good one. I don't have any like kind of comprehensive thing, but like literally just like linear feet of sidewalk that have been implemented that have been just a giant gap in the pedestrian network. Similarly, bike lanes, really trying to think about kind of the mobility aspects. What else am I missing?
Ridership numbers.
Ridership, yeah, I mentioned ridership, kind of, again, going back to that spreadsheet and kind of analysis that Metro helps us with. I mean, I always think about like how much grant funding we're able to leverage. It's not a tangible thing necessarily, but it's like, you know, it allows us to keep progressing the program, to really kind of help invest in all of these pieces. Let's go here, and we'll work that way.
I'm not sure how much, like how in-depth you are with any individual projects, but specifically 82nd comes to mind as an area, if I understand it correctly, that's trying to improve TOD. It's also an area that I'm sure you know has a lot of car-centric infrastructure. It's got used car dealerships, muffler shops, car washes, but even the restaurants are kind of like drive-through fast food. Is this a concern? Is there a concern that it is not only driving local opposition to what you're trying to do, but possibly also kind of scaring away investors, like real estate investors? Is that a problem you're encountering?
Yeah, I can speak to that one. It is something that we're really interested in, and it goes back to that piece of us not really having the land use control. But I think a really interesting kind of case study and something that we're looking at in the TOD group is not only vertical development, but also horizontal development. So how are actions that we can take supporting maybe some of that transformation? And one of the pieces that I think is really exciting is looking at like shared parking models. So in some instances, we have sites that are structured garages that, you know, it's not housing, it's auto-centric infrastructure. But if we can absorb some of that need for other projects to reduce their parking counts and incentivize some of that, you know, auto-centric development, especially along 82nd, that's something we're interested in. But I think it's a really interesting piece that we want to look more into as a program with our kind of resource constraints and not necessarily being able to go out to market grabbing a site for future TOD development. We have to always think on our feet about how we can best support land use and development in the region, especially around our station areas. So it's definitely a tricky one, but I think it's something that's really crucial to the long-term development of the region. It's how we're approaching those underutilized parcels. Yeah. Go for it.
Oh, I'm just curious, these are public-private partnerships. Do you think that, or would interest rates affect future TOD, or current projects?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's, I mean,
So the question was about public-private partnerships and do interest rates impact, you know, the ability to deliver those partnerships? Correct?
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, development is inherently risky, and interest rates have a huge impact on feasibility of projects. And, you know, anybody that's been sort of watching, you know, the various affordable housing bond measures and other subsidies that are available, you know, will know that some of the public sponsored projects is that they've had to go back to ask for additional funding because of the increase in interest rates, inflation, increased cost of labor and materials. We're always watching that very closely. And part of our sort of within the prioritization framework, you know, there is a data-driven, you know, selection for prioritization sites, and then there is a more dynamic selection procedure. And that is, the part of that is designed to basically allow us to be reactive to the economic environment. One of the advantages I think that we have as a program, and taking into context as well the governor's desire to deliver a lot more housing across the state, is we can be very patient as a seller or a partner on projects. We don't have to get paid like as soon as we enter into contract or whatever. You know, we can work through a year, 2, 3 years of land development, permitting, other design development processes, while, you know, the economy, you know, adapts, changes to current circumstances. So yeah, it's absolutely a consideration. And to some extent, we will look at projects and say, right, if it's some sort of more of a shovel-ready sort of smaller project, ironically, it may be something that is less suitable for today's market, whereas a bigger scale project actually this has a longer lead-in time and something that we can work on whilst, you know, financing catches up with the interest rate environment.
What's the thinking right now within TriMet about redevelopment of park and rides?
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
What's the thinking within TriMet right now of redevelopment of park and rides?
Right, great question. So and I don't know whether this was covered, but so we have our layers of planning, and this is the regional plan is sort of the overarching, from TriMet's perspective, it's overarching guidance for TOD, and within that, you know, we do sub-regional planning, station area plans. We just got awarded from ODOT and DCLD, TGM, a Transport Growth Management grant, to do a park and ride optimization plan. So the regional TOD plan looks at it from a sort of regional economic and social and community development perspective. This park and ride optimization plan is going to really look at parking usage as it exists today and forecasts going forward. So what we want to get out of this plan is basically a clear pathway as to which are core park and rides, and how can we streamline and optimize our park and ride portfolio as it relates to usage and as it relates to the number of customers that are using it for park and rides and the equity impact of closing certain park and rides and so on and so forth. Hopefully that study will say, right, these are the absolute core locations. These are locations where we need to downsize footprint. We can make land available for development. These are locations that we close outright. We can take the demand that was existing for this location, we can move it to other locations. So it's part of the plan. You know, it's ultimately there are various studies, and some are for and some are against, but I think the weight of research says that you get more ridership from development than you do park and rides.
Yeah, and I would also say, just kind of on a business case perspective, you know, we don't charge for park and rides. There's no value that's captured to then put into the transit. That said, we also recognize not everybody can walk or bike to transit. So like there is some balance of what amount of parking is provided either at a station, on a near a station. So the grant is really going to help us kind of tailor that more broadly along our regional transit network. And I would also say, you know, I think folks have probably been following, but the state has been really changing their tone on parking requirements. They obliterated the minimum parking requirements. That is huge. So it gives just every individual site a little bit more flexibility where it does have that transit access, that transit proximity. Say we don't need to, you know, put a million different car parking spots here. Like, let's really think more broadly about a multimodal network and what would that look like?
I would be very excited.
I know this is more of a design question, but since you're here, I thought we might have some ideas. When you're putting affordable housing right next to light rail, there is going to be a noise issue, right? And on who bears the responsibility for that? The person building the affordable housing or TriMet? And have you thought of any innovative landscape design to mitigate noise?
Yeah, that's a great question. We've actually been dealing with this on Hollywood. So we have light rail, which I always say is like, it's like basically imperceptible noise compared to the high freight rail right next to it. And so that site, it has to deal with a lot of noise, a lot of vibration. Like that is a serious consideration for the project design. And so really it's the developer who's going to have to think through the nuance of how those things work. But because it's affordable housing, they're getting federal funding for part of it. So all of the HUD requirements apply, and they have like very specific things about the like thickness, the pane of the window, and what amount of noise can come through, and if they can be operable or not. And that entire building, like a lot of Portland development now, is going to have full air conditioning because of the smoke that we've had in recent years. So anyways, let's say like because it's affordable housing, there's actually a much higher threshold of requirements than kind of general development, where it's maybe more kind of user-driven, market-driven. But yeah, I think like that is a huge consideration. In terms of design, I mean, that's an interesting site because those tracks are in Sullivan's Gulch, like they're kind of depressed. I think we struggle in general, I would say just kind of thinking with my design cap on, a lot of our light rail lines are challenged in that they do run alongside freeway corridors. And so you have all these other environmental impacts, but just like the physical environment that you're in is pretty strained. You're next to all these passing cars with noise and light rail and or freight. And just thinking about, you know, we are doing some station upgrades in our future. We've just got some more funding to do that. But like thinking about sound mitigation, thinking about, you know, how can plants maybe mitigate that? It's a huge problem. I think we partnered, was that 2 years ago, with PSU and U of O. And I remember some really brilliant ideas of like, kind of how do you take that like awkward station in a trench with a freeway on one side and a railroad on the other, and like make it a more pleasant environment. And it's tough, but I think there are definitely design tools that you can do to kind of help that situation. But I'd say like the location of it, like that's not really going to change. But I think we can try to keep mitigating and try to keep designing better as we do these kind of station refreshes. We've had an art program for a long time. I think that can be maybe not always so much with noise or kind of environmental stuff, but just kind of like really basic quality enhancements. Like if there's a mural or if there's like something that has some value to it, that can certainly help pass time when you're in the environment, a station that's not beautiful.
I would just add that those environmental justice considerations factor into our prioritization.
Yeah.
So, you know, there's a huge need for housing. There's even bigger need for affordable housing. But clearly, it'd be wrong simply just to amass affordable housing next to these, you know, highway corridors. So if we've got a site that can deliver affordable housing, isn't, you know, on such a high impact area, then clearly that's going to float higher to the top of our selection in terms of, so that we prioritize that one ahead of ones.
Yeah, so Molly, you spoke about methodology with a series of steps that included assessing metrics and context and those sorts of things, where the end result appeared to be a rank ordered list of high, medium, low. So when you get those results, are all focus on high, not much focus on medium, and then kind of forget about low? And then also, how often would you reevaluate everything to see if there's changes in that rank ordered list?
Those are both great questions. I'll answer your second one first because it's a little simpler. So we do have a pretty constrained supply of sites. So we would anticipate running that methodology again when new sites are brought in. So if there's a large, capital project that expands our parcel ownership, then we would run that again to see how that factors in. But as it stands, we're pretty static in terms of what we have. And that's one of the reasons that we're able to be so judicious and have such high standards for what we're developing, is because in a lot of ways, once that parcel is gone, it's gone. Obviously there's a long-term benefit for that, but that's something that's always in the back of our minds, is kind of this finite supply of easily developable sites. In terms of the methodology itself and how we approach kind of the output, it is a little bit thorny because, as I mentioned previously, a lot of the sites that come back as very high are all clustered, around the urban core for good reason. They're very well connected. But in terms of how we move forward with thinking about those sites, a lot of those sites end up being constrained for operational reasons or their, administrative offices, things like that. So in a lot of cases, I would say our momentum tends to be around where we can leverage that grant funding and where we're doing active planning work around sites that do come out high on that prioritization. So thinking about East County, thinking about out on the west side, areas that haven't seen that level of connectivity, and being a lot more cognizant of how we're able to have an impact for those very, very underutilized surface lots. So I would say it's a little more nuanced than just 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and a lot more engaging with our stakeholders, thinking about the community and thinking about how we're, all these kind of ingredients come together to develop a project. So.
Yeah, I'd say some of the planning efforts that are done with grant funding, they're really helpful because they allow us to basically make a pretend project. Like, hey, economic consultants, what is the market right now? So in this very specific locale, what kind of massing does the zoning say could be supported? We really get to test a project kind of 3-dimensionally before we then say, okay, we're going to put this out as a solicitation for somebody to actually do. Just kind of test fit and make sure, we're not way off in left field and it's just never going to be reality. So I'd say having those exercises fresh on the site. We obviously can't do that on every site all the time, but where we do have one, we just did kind of our red line properties. So we've got 6 or so station areas where we have really fresh material that says here's massing wise, economic wise, kind of community interest wise, what could be supported. So that will really kick a site up kind of in the priority level, because we know we've just got that kind of gut check. Who did?
Yeah, I had a couple of questions. Start with the simpler one. So how does TriMet, how does the TOD team acquire sites? Of course, there's existing park and rides and there's the right of way land that we have. But apart from that, what are the other ways in which you acquire land for TOD?
Yeah.
I'll have a go. So what we're trying to do is we want to establish a TOD fund, which will enable us, if we sort of enter into a development partnership on a park and ride, for instance, and then TriMet receives a payment as a result of that partnership, we want to be able to recycle that capital into new TOD projects. So it's sort of a virtuous cycle that continues to deliver TOD across the region. Often one of the challenges is that, you speak to any developer, land's always the first money that goes into the site, is always the first money in. And typically it's once it's in, and you don't see it again, because the land stays with the project. So being able to recycle it's a little challenging. And also the cost of land, even in the Portland metro region, it's a lot of money. We're talking about millions of dollars for a site. So we're still, when we've been having conversations with the Metro TOD team about how do we do this, whether we team up together to do it. I think there is, there's perhaps opportunities with some federal grants and funding to sort of look more into that space. There are some other programs that might work. So that's really what we do have some residual federal funds from previous projects that we could put to work. Should the right sites become available, that's something that we're hoping to do in the next 2 years. But it's a tough one. The other source of new sites is if TriMet undertakes a project, for example, like BRT on 82nd, and that project requires a staging area, then quite often it will buy a parcel, and that parcel, if so long as it's not taken back by the original owner, then repurposed for TOD once the project's complete in that parcel, because it'll be used for like staging, construction offices, so on. So those are the two real avenues for that.
And just say historically, basically, our real estate portfolio today was really established based on every kind of light rail expansion, or every major kind of capital project where we did need that footprint for either to demonstrate ridership through a park and ride with the federal government, or needed for staging to actually like build the light rail. And I think now that we have a lot of BRT projects coming up in the region, I think we're thinking about like, how do we kind of take all those same tools and that model and apply it to something such as like a longer BRT segment. I think generally BRT can be a little more right away constrained than like a light rail profile. So I think there's definitely going to be a lot of conversations in the years to come, not just TriMet, but all the other partners, Metro, the City of Portland, really thinking about how do we think about the land use in tandem with that transit investment, and making sure that, until there's the regionally preferred alternative for where that alignment actually goes, it's kind of hard to talk about land parcels, because it's like, you don't want to kind of plan all these land parcels over here, and then the regionally, the preferred alternative is over here. So it's sort of like, they need to communicate with each other, but there'll be certainly a lot of investment in those projects.
Maybe related to the POD, just Fiona talked about coordinated, but a bit back to the slides Maya's presented. You presented kind of a hierarchy of constraints, zoning, up from the state to metro, city. Kind of, to what extent you're coordinating with state, metro, and city in terms of, for example, zoning? It should not, ideally, should not be taken as given, right? Mm-hmm. So ideally, you work with them, even better, kind of coordinate with them for a TOD to run, because building a holistic idea there, kind of use a TOD project essentially to galvanize a lot of other kind of improvement to the train infrastructure and other neighborhood area. To what extent you're doing some of that?
Definitely. I think that a great example of some of the work that we did for the Better Ed station area planning, we worked really, really closely with all the jurisdictional partners, and perhaps maybe even a little too much. It really accentuated the project timeline. But one of the great things that we were able to do was produce a basically a 3-part series of massing diagrams that we were able to take to one of our jurisdictional partners and say, hey, your code is a little bit stringent. Look at, like, really visualize the difference in density that you could have if these barriers were relaxed and or updated. And so I think being creative with how you have that conversation, and luckily it's not a conversation we have to have too often. I think, as Fiona mentioned, as the state is a little bit more engaged in housing production, it's become less of a constraint on the zoning side and more on the economic side. But I think that because of that, we have a great government affairs team and a great grants team. And we're always, I mean, it's just the 3 of us. So we're pretty scrappy in terms of finding funding, connecting with partners, understanding what civic requirements there are, and really how we can leverage public dollars to deliver something that's greater than just, one idea, really bringing together funding and smart people. And I think the region is really at a great place to have.
I'm just going to say yes, please. That's because we and it's not just on TOD, it's across the region, whether it's on housing, it's on homelessness, it's on other issues. All the public agencies, we are so much more powerful when we work together. We do have regular conversation with Metro. We don't probably engage enough at state level, but it's, we sort of feed through Metro to get there. I mean, our government affairs team, we do have, staff who cover Salem. We had a meeting this morning with the City of Gresham, who do master planning, civic neighborhood, downtown neighborhood. So we want to keep those conversations going, and actually the public partnership between Gresham, Montgomery County, and TriMet for the library in East County Library is a really good example about how when you consolidate these forces, how much additional benefit you can bring in just leveraging. So yeah, anybody that's out there wants to have this conversation.
Yeah, I would maybe just add one more thing, which is, I think this reads as kind of top down. I'm like, sure, this data is obviously a much bigger piece than we are, but I think like through those different things, we're able to inform up and really say like, this is, these studies that we're doing, say the whole zoning of the state or the, town center here, like we can inform back. And I think it's really helpful when we can provide that to the city. They don't always, a lot of developers don't go provide that feedback, one-on-one. So like, that's the awesome thing about zoning. It can be changed. Like, you can't get out of a flood zone or something like more kind of environmentally fixed, but zoning is kind of something that we all have the ability to keep valuable. Exciting.
Awesome. Well, everyone join me in thanking Miles and Fiona. So thank you all again for attending today's PSU Transportation Seminar. After the seminar ends, you'll have the opportunity to complete a brief survey about today's event. Please do so. It only takes a few minutes and we would really appreciate your feedback. Thanks again, and thanks to all of you for joining us today.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.